George, the floor is yours. Good luck.
All right, I think you can see my screen, right?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, thanks a lot for the possibility to present our research here. So this is a paper I did together with my colleagues Helmut Schramm-Feiertag and Markus Murtinger, and as said, it's called Augmented CBRNE Responder Directions for Future Research. So first, maybe actually I haven't put that on the slides, but I might should mention that. What is CBRNE? It's like chemical, biological, radioactive, nuclear, and explosive risks, and we've seen like recently in the last years that these risks have been increasing. So, I mean, not only COVID, of course, which is actually like a biological risk, of course, but also like, like chemical incidents, either like by accidents or also by, of course, the risk of terrorist threats. We have seen quite some of these events in Syria, for instance. There was also like this whole, if you can remember, this whole explosion in Lebanon a couple of years ago. So actually, like overall, when you look in related work, these risks are increasing. And what we think, or what we try to look into in this paper, is how can we support responders to that events. And these responders can be either like military units, it can be special police forces, but it can be also like regular to specialized firefighters. It can also be personnel in facilities that handle hazardous materials. And all kind of these people are meant when we talk about like CBRE responders. And what currently is a lot of focus on, or because also we are doing research in this domain, like in a project currently, but also others have done this already, is like how to train CBRNE responders, how to train them for events, how to train them, and especially in virtual reality, this has come up quite a lot in the last years. However, what is less focused on, and that's like what we do this paper on, is how can you actually support and augment CBRNE responders in an actual situation? So really like, what are the people in the field, what do they need? And that's the reason why we have put together this position paper, and it's quite also like a speculative paper, where we actually, when you read the paper, it's a lot about like looking into related work and then just coming up with possibilities and ideas that can be used in that domain. And when we also look at related work, there's of course like, I mean, we've heard this already today, and as you're like all members of the HR community, you know that of course, but it means like augmentation of physical capabilities, cognitive capabilities, human senses, and also to some extent human metabolism. Although like in these papers, we're coming from technology experience side, we won't go too much, or actually we don't go at all into the human metabolism, because there are actually some interesting approaches also of hardening people by like using medicine or drugs to a CBRNE event, but that's of course not of our focus nor of our knowledge in that area. So let me first look into the physical capabilities. Here we see actually quite a lot of work in related work, and also in a related project, like for instance the Ingenious project, which is not that much about CBRNE responders, but about first responders in more like on the medical side. But here you can see a lot of like symbiosis between humans and robots, humans and machines. We can also see, when here you can see like for instance like a robot of the Fraunhofer Institute that is used, and especially in CBRNE, UAV and UGVs, also unmanned aerial vehicles and unmanned ground vehicles, so drones or robots in short. They can be quite handy when it comes to access hazardous areas and look into them, because of course they are not that prone to being poisoned or to actually, and even if like, like some aspects break and you lose a robot but you don't lose a person, so of course it's quite good to like send in the robots and the drones and those stuff first. And that is of course currently done already. But what we can see in related work is that this will actually change. So currently robots are a tool, but in the future, and there's also like in a project we are currently working on, more on a general level, but it will also come to CBRNE incidents, is that robots will be more a member of a team. So they take on a dedicated role inside the team and not just act as a tool, but act as a member of the team. But then of course, like the question arises, how to communicate between the robot and the commanders. Also, like when you see like the robot, for instance, does a plan of the CBRNE incident area, how can we then communicate that area to, let's say, the person who is in that suit there? What information does the person need? For instance, we can use like real-time visualization of threats, so we can actually, like, especially a lot of these threats when it comes to radioactive or sort of chemical and biological threat, they are not visible. So it's actually quite a large possibility of, by visualizing these threats and making them visible to humans, to enhance and support them. I will also come to that later, of course, when it comes to augmentation of senses. But also, like, let's say we send a robot in, how does the robot communicate that area to like a control environment and so on? Those are all aspects that could be interesting for future research in that area. Second, I won't talk too much about that because I think there are actually a lot of experts here in this community who know this better than me. But interestingly, like, augmented strength is already an ongoing topic in research, and has been often envisioned as like a super important future technology for military use. But when you look into like studies and in related work, you can see that actually they're not that widely used as thought, because mainly due to the missing adaptation, at least that's what the related work claims, of users to tasks and environment. So it seems that, like, especially when it comes to like hard environments, rough environments, these exoskeletons are not ready for usage in the real yet. Interestingly, I've put like on the right side, there is actually quite an interesting concept study, let's say, for firefighters to support them. Of course, this can also be quite interesting for CBRNE forces, because like firefighters and CBRNE forces often share similar concepts and similar ways of working. So we'd see like the next important step here could be like hardening these solutions for rough environments. And of course, maybe I forgot to add that in the beginning. I hope we still have time at the end, although we are already a little late in the conference. Also, the whole idea of the talk and of the paper is, of course, to foster discussion within the community. So if you have any ideas on that topics, and of course, let me know, or also get in contact with me later on. When it comes to cognitive capabilities, so support of cognitive capabilities, assistance systems are quite important. We've done a lot of research on that, but never in the CBRN domain so far, but mostly in like assistance for maintenance, assistance for production, like production lines, how can you support people there, and so on and so on. But of course, like, we can see this, for instance, by like a paper by Global Data Thematic Research, that AR and wearable devices will be important, and also decision-making support through AI system will be promising. So what we envision is that we can have like augment these responders by in-context expert systems, for instance, could be speech-based systems that can support them. For instance, when you're decontaminating something, the system can actually provide you step-by-step guidance, or when you may calculate, currently a lot of like process and calculations are still like done by hand and so on, and this can also of course be done by the AI system. And that's more like for the people who are really in the field on the ground, but also when it comes to like mission planning or overview of the situation, AI-based CBRN software is definitely a trend and something that we will see in the future, because, let's say, automated mission planning and also like keeping track of how long people are already in the situation, when to exchange people, also maybe combined with, let's say, biophysical signals that you can see who is stressed or who is already on the limit and so on, because of course, being in such a hazardous environment, potential life-threatening environment, is quite a stressful situation. Also, of course, important, or actually supporting, can be like to enhance situation awareness. What is situation awareness? It's basically knowing on what's going on around you. And there's some interesting work, I won't go too much into detail here, let's say for blind users, where like the distance to other people is zonified, or tactile vests that put you like into knowledge of your other team members in a multiplayer game. And of course, that this comes again in with this also like teams of people, like knowing where your others are, also knowing where the robots are who are a team, get a kind of better overview of the situation, Also like visualization of the SARS areas and information like how long am I in a contaminated zone, maybe also like visualizing or making them otherwise feelable by augmenting the person is, for instance, like I have maybe get a sense to that I know where the wind is coming from. I mean, this sounds crazy because normally I have senses where the wind is coming from, but if you like think of that picture again, then you don't have any sense if you're in that suit anymore. I mean, apart from maybe visual cues of moving trees or so, but this could also be like information that you can provide again to the people in that suit, because that can also be important if the wind is coming from that direction, also like the hazardous materials coming from that direction and so on. So that's about like enhancing cognitive capabilities. For human senses, we can see two main streams. Like one is vision, hearing, and touch. And I think here there is already a lot of work going on, although not in the domain of CBRN. We have to, for instance, this paper I've taken a screenshot on the right side by people from the Schmalstieg group, for instance, where they use drones to augment human vision. So you have then an AR glasses, you have a drone flying around, and then you can see things that are behind the wall, for instance. And so a lot of like AR and HUD technology can be used here for making threats visible, for making inaccessible areas visible, but also maybe taking on other people's perspectives. So I can then, for instance, like jump into another person, either while I'm in the field or while I'm in a control room, and just get a better insight here. And although visual augmentation is super helpful here, and the AR classes are totally helping here, and there's also like a couple of approaches already to integrate these AR classes. Also, other senses can be quite important, because AR can be, or visual AR can be quite intrusive and distracting. For instance, we talked to like people who were from armed forces, and they said, it's, for instance, really important if I draw a weapon, I want like everything out of my line of sight, because I feel like you think that like this can be potential combat situations also. And if there's like, let's say, a threatening aggressor, and you have to like fight against him, and you like draw a weapon, and suddenly there's some information popping up in front of you telling you maybe something about like the wind direction or so, this could of course be dangerous. So here we can also use like augmented hearing. We have done quite a lot of work in like augmented reality, acoustic augmented reality, mostly with blind people, but here we can see like this can also be super beneficial for first responders to CBRN events. Last but not least, an interesting side note on augmented taste and smell. We totally didn't have that on our radar, to be honest, because it sounds crazy to like taste or smell CBRN substances. But then we talked to like a CBRN responder, and they said, like, for instance, in some situations, it's really helpful if you have a sense of smell. So let's say in mustard gas in Iraq, like the UN inspectors often like first went in without masks, because you can really smell that substance quite quickly. And then, of course, as soon as you smell it, you put on your mask and then like take care of the environment. And that could, of course, be an option that you like then use like external sensors to actually, because there's things like electric noses and so on. There's also work also in the EIT in that direction, not in our group, but in another group. And you take that knowledge and then combine this with some kind of electrical simulation of the olfactory receptors, so that you can like be in a protective gear, but still be able to get a smell of the environment, which could be useful potentially, because it actually was an examination strategy. And of course, you can also put this like as visual information or whatsoever, but still it's kind of a different thing if you kind of smell threats. So quite experimental, of course, but this could be quite an idea of where there's actually also a lot of potential for like future research and future work in that direction. Augmented taste, to be honest, seems quite far-fetched, because like tasting substances was never part of at least of a good examination strategy. So we don't consider any proper usage of that augmentation of human senses. But as said, smell can be quite promising. So summarizing again, what have we speculated on? We talked a little about collaboration between UAVs and UGVs and humans. How can we put the robots in a team and what is needed here? We've seen like augmented strengths, exoskeletons. When it comes to cognitive abilities, like the important is like the use of assistance systems, like AI-driven expert systems that help taking decisions in the field. Also, feedback on environmental factors can be super important to enhance situation awareness. And as said, augmentation of vision, hearing, and touch is quite promising. And augmentation of smell is an experimental yet maybe promising approach that should be like looked into in the future. As said, this is mostly a position paper, so it's actually like a kind of mixture between an overview of related work in that area and some speculations what could be done. And of course, in the future, we aim to investigate some of these aspects further, because we have some projects that are related to CBRN or general first responders. And yeah, I hope I did not go too much over time. I think maybe a minute or so or two, at least according to my counter. And I'm very happy if you have any last questions or any questions in general for me. Thanks a lot.
You are welcome.